Palestinians. If you look at the way that the media portrays the state of play within the state of Israel day to day, it's sickening what they convey and what they fail to relay, for they say nothing of the sales of weapons coming from the USA. A shock and awe campaign, all in the name of self-defense. It's nonsense, this pretense, this pre-assembled semblance. An Israeli attack is a daily occurrence, and the fact is that the people are reacting as a consequence to a relentless charade, a blockade that blocks aid, with innocents defenceless from a senseless barricade. But for every small defeat, every bullet-ridden street, for every person they mistreat, harmed by the armed elite, for every town made obsolete by every single block of concrete, this is a project that will never be complete, because the missing piece is peace. It's time to follow our hearts and not orders, to build bridges, not borders. Problems are solved when both parties involved are willing to participate in a debate without killing. How many lives does it take to stop the blood spilling? When fundamental human rights are systematically denied, it's no wonder fundamentalists decide to take their lives by committing suicide. What if you had grown up in a school that was blown up and nobody had shown up with tools to rebuild? Or you had watched as your entire family was killed? Would you ever shake the sound of soldiers' footsteps on the ground, as everything you loved was taken with a single round? Walls installed to segregate will only generate hate and never separate the people from the problems they create. The weight of the mortality rate rests upon the states as the economic sponsors since 1948. And with 1 million civilians reduced to refugees, and a Gaza stripped of its rights and liberties, it is time that they addressed and pressed these problems overseas. Because for every small defeat, every bullet-ridden street, for every person they mistreat, harmed by the armed elite, for every town made obsolete by every single block of concrete, this is a project that will never be complete. No, the work will never cease, because the missing piece is peace. Thank you.
My name's Andrew Burgin, and I was for many years the press officer for Stop the War Coalition, and particularly for the period around February the 15th and the mass demonstration. And I also worked with a number of the artists to produce the Pax Britannica show, which we showed at the Aquarium Gallery, and we did many other events, benefits, art exhibitions, poetry readings, film shows. I was looking last night for this because it's 10 years, and you forget. You forget the things that we've done. But I mean, I didn't take any notes, but what I did do is I put down the name of every artist, playwright, architect, filmmaker who had worked with us. Now, if I were to read all of these out, there would be no time for the 3 fantastic artists here to show their work, but it just shows the range of work that was produced for this great movement, because a great movement produces great art, and this movement produced great art not just from the artists themselves, but from the people who came on the demonstrations. If you were on the demonstration on February the 15th, 2003, or any of the demonstrations, you will have seen thousands of fantastic homemade placards, you know, some of which said, you know, there was a huge one that said, the war could kill this many, and it was on the big demonstration of 1.5 to 2 million people, and that was close to the reality. The war did possibly kill, some estimates are up to 1 million people, but the creativity of the people was quite something. And there are some artists that, you know, that I remember kind of actually coming on. The Banksy, the street artist, made his own homemade placards and then gave them out to the school students that came on the march. I'm desperate to get hold of one. they now retail for £10,000 each. You know, not for the money, of course. But there are some other people that I just want to mention while I'm here, because they're people who are no longer with us, and they're people who played such an important role. Someone's just said Adrian Mitchell. Adrian Mitchell, a very fine poet, but also someone absolutely committed to the movement, to the socialist movement, to the peace movement. Adrian was one of the poets at the very famous Albert Hall poetry session in the 60s, where he did a poem called Tell Me Lies About Vietnam, which still makes the hairs on the back of my head stand up when I hear it. But he adapted it for the very first march against Afghanistan to Tell Me Lies About Afghanistan, and sadly Adrian is no longer with us. Corinne Redgrave, who was at the heart of the theatrical movement against. Corinne did so much for us, but one of the things he got Gielgud and many others to do a banner drop at the National Theatre, a banner drop against the war. And every Friday at the National, lunchtime, they put on sessions called Collateral Damage, in which different actors came and actually explained in theatre what the war would mean. So we owe a great debt to Corinne and to his partner Kika, who did our first theatrical thing. And also Harold Pinter has to be mentioned, because if there's anybody who brought an anger and a contempt to Tony Blair, it was Harold Pinter. You couldn't be with Harold Pinter without experiencing his complete correct and righteous loathing of the man. You know, he just embodied it. And so these are Richard Hamilton, who worked with us as well, a very fine artist, and not just artists, but scientists. Stephen Hawking, who is still with us, but who worked with us, and a fantastic Nobel Prize winner called Joseph Rotzblatt, which I hope a number of you will have heard of, who came in the bitter cold on a November day and read the names of those who had died in the Iraq War, when we had a reading in Trafalgar Square, and we were joined by many others. So I'm going to apologise for not mentioning the people here, but we do have three fantastic artists here. We have Katharine Hamnett, who you should all know, one of Britain's leading fashion designers, but whose work has dominated the political movement for the last 30 years, I think, maybe more. David Gentleman, whose placards were the heart of the movement, and I've actually brought today an original placard that we carried. I mean, it's a bit battered. It came actually on the demonstration 10 years ago, and we went round after it was bitterly cold, and so most people in Hyde Park lit fires with the placards, as they should do, to keep warm. But this is one that we managed to save, and no doubt it will be in a museum one day. But we produced thousands upon thousands of these, and when you see these photographs of the mass demonstration, it's an amalgam of the homemade placards, but these as well, these very powerful messages. And Rob Montgomery, who's very creative street art, he's worked with Occupy. He did our 10th anniversary Afghanistan demo, and he's going to speak about his work too. But I think we'll start. Is it fixed now, David? No. Okay. Well, I'd still like to start with David saying a few words about how he came to be involved in Stop the War, because David's done many things. He's the muralist. He's done, if you go to Charing Cross Station, he's done the murals there. He's designed postage stamps. I think you did the Shell posters, did you? I mean, some of them. You know, so he's got a huge range of work but the work that he's done for us, I mean, there are my favourites. I mean, one of them is the Lebanon thing, you know, in 2006, when you did the broken Lebanon symbol. That's a fantastic image. This one, the Blair which has become ubiquitous really, and really Tony Blair can no longer walk the streets safely, thank God. Anyway, I'll give you David Gentleman and he'll speak for a little while.
Need my pictures before I can talk with any sense. Can you go on?
Well, the only thing I did say is that, Andy, you asked me to do this at 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, and I couldn't get the images together. So
okay.
Maybe I should.
Let's start with Katharine. Let's start with Katharine Hamnett, and just in introducing Katharine, I first I first had knowledge of Katharine when I think Margaret Thatcher stupidly invited her to Downing Street, and Katharine went in wearing a fantastic T-shirt that said, I think Pershing were the nuclear weapons.
50% don't want Pershing, right?
87%.
No, 58%.
Oh, was it? I've upped it to 87%. 58% don't want Pershing. So there's a photograph of Margaret Thatcher trying to look, not embarrassed, shaking your hand. Katharine.
Well, actually, thank you very much for that. Yeah, she hadn't actually read what was on that T-shirt when that picture was taken, because I'd kind of snuck it in, knowing what would happen, like I'd be thrown out of the door if they saw it, because I sort of tended to be kind of a little bit shivery and kept my coat on, and I just revealed it at the last minute, too, because I actually went there just because I thought it was a photo opportunity, because I couldn't stand her, and I thought it was an opportunity to get an incredible photograph. And for once, it actually worked. I mean, you can go for a photo opportunity and it's complete catastrophe. But that was a good one. I worked with the Stop the War on a T-shirt, which was, in fact, not even my phrase. I sort of feel I'm here as a bit of an imposter, because not in my name was, one of those incredible 3-word sentences, maybe not even in a sentence, because there's verbs implied. But I think it came up from the Vietnam War, somebody was saying. I just felt that this was so appropriate because 92%, I think, of the people polled in a BBC poll said they were against the invasion of Iraq without a second UN resolution. So this kind of not in my name represented actually our money being spent, our forces being sent over to Iraq. And we've got the pictures actually. I just saw these beautiful pictures in this book. I didn't have a chance to bring any pictures today, but there's lots of them out there. And I think, obviously there's all sorts of Don't Attack Iraq, Not in My Name, many other huge slogans. But in a way, I would actually be very arrogant and claim responsibility for the kind of cleaned up face of protest, because, I was at college during the 60s and the Student Revolt, and, I've seen a lot of marches, been on a lot of marches, and it was very sad because you've got, these sort of hand-drawn rainbows, which are really well-intentioned, but you're competing with the highly sophisticated media. And so when I started doing those T-shirts, I actually wanted to sophisticate protest. I wanted to slick it up. So I have produced dozens of them, because in the 80s I was a really well-known fashion designer, and we were doing catwalk shows and getting excessive amounts of coverage. 27 TV interviews after a fashion show wasn't unusual. And so I did dozens of them. We started with Choose Life, which was central to a Buddhist concept. Worldwide nuclear ban now, Save the Whales, Stop Acid Rain, Education Not Missiles, which I'm reading out again in various versions, for the COD demo on April 1st at Aldermaston, and it's going to be Education Not Trident, Pensions Not Trident, Kids Co, a charity I'm very fond of, Not Trident, and Freedom Pass, Not Trident. But they're great because they're legible from 200 metres, and you get any image, any press coverage of a protest, and you could read these things. And it puts over, it came from the time I started doing, the T-shirts, and the early 80s under Thatcher, when I felt that we no longer had a voice, democracy had slipped through our fingers, and I wanted to be able to give us something that could crack through all the censorship and would scream it out. And what's quite interesting is things like worldwide nuclear ban now were regarded as extremely contentious at the time. And there was Top of the Pops, which was the best English pop programme on once a week. And somebody appeared in the audience wearing this t-shirt, and I was fascinated to watch because they changed the cameras that they were broadcasting so that this person was always behind a pillar. But then next week, what was unbelievable is every single person on Top of the Pops was wearing it. And it was like one of those moments you thought, oh my God, I'm not alone. You know what I mean? We all feel the same. T-shirts are very, very useful. Before they went, when Bush declared, you know, the war on terror, which we just thought, I mean, he's got to be insane. I had an interview to do on Monday morning, and I managed to, through the local Snappy Snaps, knock up 4 T-shirts that I think was like, you know, it was like an interview fashion thing. What should be wearing? We should actually be wearing T-shirts that say no to the war on terror. So I did Life is Sacred, Stop and Think, No War, Women Against War. And after that, later than that, I did I'm a Muslim, not a terrorist, because I've got a lot of Muslim friends, as well as a lot of Jewish friends and agnostic friends. And it was very frightening what suddenly started happening, this xenophobia. But then I carried on. We had the war on terror, we invaded Iraq, and so I did Stop War Blair Out and Jail Tony in a fashion show, and I got Jada Kidd to wear them down the catwalk. And this was, didn't go down too well, but it was quite interesting. I had a friend who had a friend whose father was in steel, who was having lunch at Checkers that Sunday, and it was all the Sunday newspapers had it on the front page, and Blair was absolutely furious and ordered a special investigation into my financial affairs. Luckily, I kept a fairly clean slate, but he did find some money I borrowed from the company, and they zapped me for 92,000 quid, which at that point nearly wiped me out. But I think the best compliment that I was ever paid by the Blair government is actually, I've got my personal anti-T-shirt law, which is Article 13 of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which says that you're not actually allowed to wear politically contentious. And I think Joe would be a complete doddle. It's another photo opportunity. Anyway, thank you very much. Wow.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. I'm assuming that that image means that we're good to go, David, does it?
Almost, I don't
That's one of the images anyway. So let's.
Okay.
Shall we start?
I'll settle for that. You'll see, if you're interested in seeing what comes next, look on the left. This is what you should really be looking at. I was asked to talk about art and war. The two things, what I'm really, I'm here primarily as an artist. Politics isn't my prime concern, but there, I think that the link between, this should be moving on, but it's refusing to. Okay. Andrew, could you find the IT?
I will.
Both as well.
Keep going there, David.
You'll see this in pictures in due course, but my real interest is watercolour, very homely and quiet and inoffensive medium. And a watercolour box is full of little pens. And if you turn from these contain your colours, your blues and greens.
Yeah. I know you got them.
Okay. Oh, great. Terrific. What a relief. Anyway, the essence of the whole thing, to make it practical, is it's compartmentalized. You can't, if you would be in chaos if you didn't have these neat little pads. But what I like about the medium is it's the way that one colour merges into another. Only watercolour can do this. And in a way, I think that my life merges from one thing into another as well, from the art side of what I do to the practical or the graphic. So I love Suffolk and have worked there a lot. Also in London, which is where I've really lived all my grown-up life. And some of these pictures have found their way into books. I'm going to sit down because I can see this screen better here. So this is from the first of 6 books I did. And this one is the most recent, a year ago. This is, I do think that London's beautiful, but it takes many different forms. I've also, you might have seen these images.
Yes.
100 meters long. These are at the other end of the scale, they're tiny. And doing these, although I got the task of doing stamps in the first place, I think, because I knew how to draw and was interested in small things. But in the process, I also learned quite a lot about symbolism, about icons, and this extended the range of what I do, and it's been a useful adjunct to what I'm really interested in. This the Americans didn't actually use. But it came from a book that I did about, at the end of the 80s, so a long time ago, about a relationship that I felt it was, and this relationship was much respected and pride taken in at the time, which I really think has changed in the meantime. Anyway, from my mild and inoffensive work up to that point, I made these images as rude as I knew how. Not that rude by today's standards, but I did my best. That's a Buick engraving on the right. There were no words except sometimes something to explain a scene. It says green common at the bottom. This is the image on the right is the one that got up most people's noses. And when the Standard reviewed this book, in a quite friendly tone of voice, it did come under the heading, "No longer a gentleman." Anyway, the final double spread in the book is of people protesting. So this image is 20 odd years old, a bit more. But I wasn't absolutely satisfied with what I'd done in the book, because I thought that people looked at it briefly and then it was shut away in its covers and forgotten. And I began to think that they might have been better as posters. Anyway, when it began to look as if the Iraq war was imminent, I went, like many people here, on the marches and turned up the papers where you couldn't read what anybody's posters were saying, except maybe lawyers against the war up at the top. The main thing, it looked a muddle. So I thought, if I kept that press photograph in mind, but stuck some nose, big ones and small ones and little ones all over it, and showed this to Stop the War, who Tony Benn had told me were the people to get in touch with. that they might be, this might be a device for making them use it, which it turned out to be so, and I've done a lot for them ever since. I did it in my fairly primitive technology of the time with bits of Xeroxing and cutouts. And for a while I was dependent on people to help me, particularly a very good guy called Phil Waite, who helped stop the war in various ways. This was the poster that tempted people, persuaded people to come to the march. It was stuck every place on pillar boxes and walls, and I think this also, as Nina said a moment ago, I think that this is something that has now become criminal. But a lot of these were printed. I went to the printing works, and the posters were piled high to the ceilings with people frantically sticking them onto, well, the real placards onto sticks. And this is the one, as you know, a little bit slightly foxed in the copy that Andrew brought along. And it does look to me, anyway, a little bit like the photograph that I had in mind.
That's brilliant.
This is a lovely picture. I've always thought, failed to understand Kipling's quote, the glory, or motto, the glorious dead. I don't see any conceivable glory in being dead. I'd like to talk a little bit about how the blood was done, for instance. It was done with my customary watercolour, but to get it looking suitably splashed, I had to drop it from a ruling pen from as high as I could reach, about 6 feet, 7 feet up, onto very expensive watercolour paper. This is a useful ruling pen because it's double the usual size and it holds a lot of colour. And as it drops, it spreads in an alluring fashion. And with this, I gradually chose the drops, the watercolour drops of blood that I liked most, and turned them into a symbol that in one form or other has been used ever since. Sometimes replacing letters, sometimes as additional decoration, sometimes within the counter of a letter. The inside bit of an O is called a counter. There it is, simply stuck on in the studio with adhesive, and then it gradually became, it worked as print. I tried to keep them all fairly simple, not merely the less words, but the less letters that you have on a placard. If you want it to be readable over a big distance, you have to keep everything in it down to the irreducible minimum. That I remember in Parliament Square, I was able to read this across Parliament Square. This one I kept on the studio wall for quite a while before I dared to offer it, because the guy was Prime Minister. I thought, is this a prudent career move to risk? But in the end, I did. Like you, Nina, I can't think of anybody I detest as much as Blair. I also, at one point, I wanted to go back a moment. I couldn't use Blair as one of the counter of the letter A, because in this Helvetica font, which I'm fond of, it has this kind of A. So at that point, I changed it to an American font called Avant-Garde, which I've used since, because it's easier to see it. It gives you, it improves your opportunities. And once or twice I drew the letters as well, but I think that they are a distraction. I don't want them to look interestingly hand-drawn. All I want them to be is readable and simple. I also, this was at the time when Blair was being grilled at the inquiry, and I included a lot of awful things at the bottom of it that had happened. But although they're there, I think that they're really distractions. Important, but they take up a lot of space on the poster. This is one of the later ones, which I think this is really about as simple as I can get anything. I took these photographs on the occasions, the marches, and I like the sense of them being events. There was going to be a demo or an installation in Parliament Square at the time that the Lancet had just announced that there were, they thought that 100,000 people up to that point, it's about 7 years ago, had been killed in the war. And I thought that 100,000, we know it's a lot, but it's also a very familiar set of digits. It doesn't really, it doesn't make you think particularly. It's like trillions today. You don't know what they mean. But I thought, if I put 100 blood drops onto a sheet of card and printed 1,000 of those sheets of card and laid them out in Parliament Square, you would see what 100,000 blood drops or 100,000 dead people look like. It's a lot. That was there for a morning. A very good team of people started to peg it out, and then as people began to look round, and curious people, bypassers, they also joined in. They helped to peg the things out too. It was there for the afternoon, and after lunch the wind began to blow and it blew away. But it would have had to be done by the afternoon anyway, and it had made its point. Anyway, here on the plinth in Trafalgar Square, most of the people who really helped me throughout, John Rees on the left, Tony Benn, Andrew Murray, the other Andrew Burgin, Lindsay, German, and not in the picture, but Chris Nyman, who is the person who asked me to come along today. That's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
I remember pegging out those towers, and it was very windy from the very beginning, so you'd peg one out and then it would fly off, and it was a nightmare. But the photographs of it look absolutely stunning.
How big were those cards?
Pardon?
How big was each?
They were each was about 3 by 2, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, you could just hold on.
Just hold it. We've still got some. I've still got some.
I've got some.
We've archived them. And David's right that before February the 15th we were allowed to fly post. That's now become more or less illegal throughout Britain. They will stop you fly posting, they will prosecute you, they will pursue you. But we fly posted everywhere. We fly posted lamp posts, pillar boxes, telephone boxes, walls, huge areas. And that kind of street protest propaganda is extraordinarily important, and one of the finest exponents of it is our next speaker, Robert Montgomery, who's going to speak about his work. Robert, thank you.
Hi guys. I probably have the same AV challenge as David had. I use this on PCs. Is anyone good on PCs? Come on.
you.
Yeah. I'm not a speaker.
It's just on, it's on this USB stick.
Yeah.
It's called 10 Years on Talk.
Was a PDF?
It's a PDF file.
Should I take this one?
There it is, it's fine.
That's all right.
Can you make it full screen?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Super, thank you.
Thank you very much. That's why we need young people in the movement.
Can everyone hear okay? Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm very honoured to be on the same stage as Katharine and David, because they're two people who, when I was young, inspired me a lot in terms of my own work, so it's really nice for me. I've just got a little thing that puts this idea of being an artist and working for peace and doing idealistic gestures in a bit of context, because I find from my generation of artists, we're lazy. We tend to be lazy hipsters who think it's not even that cool to do things that are, you know, idealistic, overtly political, or for peace. There's a real sense of that in the sort of post-YBA generation, that it's in some way not our place, and that it might not change anything anyway. So I wanted to take an example from what I call the 100-year cycle, which goes back to 1849, and to a speech that Victor Hugo gives to this very interesting thing called the International Peace Congress of 1849. Now, the International Peace Congresses were began in 1843 by a guy called, a Quaker actually, appropriately in this building, a Birmingham Quaker called Joseph Sturge, quite an amazing guy, anti-slavery activist. He helped found an early version of the Morning Star in the 1850s, not the same one that was restarted in the 1930s, but an earlier version. A chartist, and kind of amazing for a Birmingham Quaker, traveled to St. Petersburg to see Tsar Nicholas I as part of an effort on the part of the Society of Friends, the Quakers, to prevent the outbreak of the Crimean War, which is pretty interesting. Now, by the time of 1846, I think, there was a second peace congress in Belgium. There was one in the early 1850s in Frankfurt. But the one in 1849, a lot of the Parisian artists and writers were at the forefront of it. It was partly called by Victor Hugo, in his like literary introduction, basically. I love this picture of him as a sort of like young camp Hugo, a bit like a sort of, you know, Parisian Oscar Wilde figure. His speech at the conference, I've always found really inspiring. This is a bit about the proceedings, everyone arriving in Paris, in the middle of the night, the hotels being full, getting to the Congress in the morning. And on that day, Hugo says this: "A day will come when your arms will fall even from your hands. A day will come when war will seem as absurd and impossible between Paris and London, between Petersburg and Berlin, between Vienna and Turin, as it would be impossible and would seem absurd today between Rouen and Amiens, between Boston and Philadelphia. A day will come when you France, you Russia, you Italy, you England, you Germany, you all nations of the continent, without losing your distinct qualities and your glorious individuality, will be merged closely within a superior unit, and you will form the European Brotherhood. Just as Normandy, Brittany, Burgundy, Lorraine, Alsace and other provinces are merged together in France, a day will come when the only fields of battle will be markets opening up to trade and minds opening up to ideas. A day will come when the bullets and the bombs will be replaced by votes, by the universal suffrage of the people, by the venerable arbitration of a great sovereign Senate, which will be to Europe what this Parliament is to England, what this Diet is to Germany, what this Assembly is to France. A day will come when we display cannon in museums, just as we display instruments of torture today, and are amazed that such things could ever have existed or been possible." The thing about this is, I think it must have seemed absurd to a contemporary audience. It must have seemed like outrageous idealism. It must have seemed, when you think of what happened from 1849 to 1946, there was a century of terrible war within Europe, in both of the major wars, France and Germany, on opposite sides. And however, by the time we get to the 1950s, Europe is more or less at peace with itself. And the idea of an integrated, peaceful Europe has become a mainstream idea. So in that 100 years, in some way the politicians catch up with the artists and the writers. And I think it's this point that as artists we can take our humble part in the political assembly, we can be part of the discourse, and we shouldn't be afraid of saying outrageous, even sometimes idealistic statements, with the hope that history might catch up with us. A little bit about a project I just did in Berlin. This is something I spent maybe a year and a half working on. It's at the old US Army base at Tempelhof. So it is therefore on the site of the airport which Hitler used to make Stukas in World War II, which the Red Army captured. This whole building here, the largest airport in Europe at its time, built in the 20s, renovated by the Nazis, enlarged by the Nazis in the 30s. The base where they made Stukas for the Second World War. It was liberated by the Red Army in 1945. They set fire to the basements and then flooded the basements, where from anecdotal accounts it was sort of last of the SS command and residents who wouldn't shift. Then passed to the American Army in '46 and used as a Cold War base, basically, from the 50s through to the 80s. These are the baseball fields that the American Army built, and they look like they've been dropped from sort of like suburban California, plop into Berlin. On the front of these, there's the scoreboards for telling the score in the game. I really wanted to work in this site because when I was a kid at comprehensive school in Scotland in Prestwick in Ayrshire, from my maths class window I could see a little American flag. In the first week asking the other kids what that was. No one really knew. But from the third floor of our building you could see into a part of Prestwick Airport that was used to fly in elements for the American nuclear base at Faslane, which was about 30 miles away. So I took this very personally. I became very upset, and I felt like I went to school in a country that was occupied by an American occupying force. None of the other kids seemed to be that worried about this, but it always really stuck in my head. Therefore, being invited to do something in Berlin, we worked for a year to try and get permission to work on these pieces of US military hardware. In the end, we got permission. We could go into the structure though only in 4 places, so it became a sort of feat of engineering, and they're probably 6 meters long and about 3.5 meters high. Echoes of voices in the high towers, all wounds explained here, all knives bandaged, all empires arrested, all castles unbuilt, all hearts unbroken. I just wanted to do a very simple poem about peace, really. And this idea of all knives bandaged comes from an avant-garde German artist called Joseph Beuys, who worked in the 60s and 70s. And it's his very lovely metaphor for, essentially, if you get cut by a knife and you bandage only the cut, the knife can cut someone else. But if you bandage the knife, you protect the next person. We did a sort of series of billboards around the perimeter fence of Tempelhof, inside the old military perimeter fence, that echo in a more detailed way, some of Victor Hugo's statements in that speech. Echoes of voices in the high towers, shadows of spring trees in the park, a library memory of a century narrowly escaped. With Berlin, you get this incredible sense that you can see the horrors of the 20th century physically in the city. As well as there being Tempelhof, there's a very, very interesting and sort of touching, very small street in the former Eastern Bloc called Hiroshima Straße, which we don't have in Britain, and which I feel in Britain and in America we love to erase that part of the Second World War history. But the quiet reminder of Hiroshima in Berlin is also really touching. I mean, you can read these. They sort of go around the perimeter fence. And then there's another light piece, and these are made with solar-powered LEDs on the other baseball field inside the airport itself. else do we have? This is the piece I did at the rally in Trafalgar Square for the 10th anniversary of the war in Afghanistan. And it was exactly, in fact, coming to the demonstration in February 2003, seeing things like David's work that actually made me start doing this work. I immediately that summer started making these posters in Shoreditch and putting them up first of all on those bus stop posters without any permission, but I had a look and I realised that you could, I don't think there are any here, you know those ones that light up beside the bus stops?
Yeah.
I had a look
On the
one day
side.
and if I went to Halfords and got an Allen key set, I could just go over at night and
Wow.
and pop them open. So this was the first of a series I called Words in the City at Night that all existed on those bus stop posters and really directly influenced by what you were doing, David, in the February. When we were sleeping, aeroplanes carry memories of the horrors we have given our silent consent to into the night sky of our cities and leave them there to gather like clouds and condense into our dreams before morning. This idea that the things we allow to happen in our name via our silent consent will have a kind of interior consequence, a sort of karmic consequence on all of us who allow it to happen, and the symbol of that sort of karmic consequence is the dream state, that will permeate anyway your consciousness while you sleep, if not when you awake. These are some other billboards. I did 23 billboards around Berlin this in the summer of 2012, and these are some of them, and these are a series which out of the series came a collaboration with Occupy. Simply, you know, here comes the boom of the end of your civilization, and don't you look pretty in your cool new jeans. Here come what we get for 100 years of privilege squandered and nothing done to educate our children or save our planet. Here comes the cabriolet edition of capitalism, and the end of an empire you were too conceited to even protect. Here comes the rising tide. Here comes the Middle East. Here comes the weather. Here comes everybody. Occupy had sort of seen this series I'd done on Old Street, which was the time that Occupy set up outside St. Paul's Cathedral, and it talked in a sort of poetic and subtle way about Occupy, 10,000 miles of flags and a row of tents in front of the cathedral guard our future. And they asked me if I'd collaborate with them on some billboards, and in the end what we did is we took phrases from the Berlin series of billboards, and we took that "Here Comes Everybody" phrase and we made a series of these. Sorry. we took this one, and we took like a phrase from this one. Can you read them? Are they two?
Yeah, I read this one earlier.
Sorry.
The audience wants to read
slow down me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I know them, so I always look through them. These two are a sort of duo. But we took the last phrase from the first one, and we made a very different looking series
No,
of
the
just
other one was better.
just what? So we have this one here. So Here Comes Everybody. We took with Occupy, and we made a series of white billboards that went up in Bristol and London that just said "Here Comes Everybody." And that's about it, really. What else do I have here? A fire
That's
poem.
fantastic.
A fire
Wow.
poem at Tempelhof, again on the site of the old American Air Base, on the site of the Luftwaffe's stupid factory, that says "The way the pagan gods are half remembered here," which I sort of set fire to at dusk as a sort of little ritual at the end of that, the opening of that project, and that's it burned.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Very good.
Well, thanks very much for that. The book where there is a lot of the art and the demonstration photos and a timeline of all the events that we've done is on sale here if you want to get copies. This is the commercial plug. We've got, I think, about 15 minutes if anybody has questions they'd like to put to Katharine, David or Robert. Somebody here has something to say and somebody there, and we'll keep it going from there. Be as brief as you can so we can get a few people.
Katharine, I'm really sorry I got here late, so I didn't get your full name. Katharine Hamnett. And you mentioned the CND demo at Aldermaston when?
It's on the 1st of April.
1st of April, which is also Easter Monday and April Fool's Day. It's going to be quite a day. Okay, thank you.
The General Secretary of CND is here, willing to take questions about Aldermaston and their march at Aldermaston. Go on.
Yeah, I actually have two questions. The first is for Katharine, and I think that the idea of like disseminating ideas through fashion can be really, really powerful, but it's also being seen as a way of like commodifying struggle, and also that it can end up being co-opted. Like the keffiyeh, which a very famous model was wearing on the front page of Vogue, then went sort of like global and is now sold in H&M and places like that, and it's lost all of its, not all of its political significance, but it has detracted somewhat because people are wearing the black and white scarves.
I would.
Okay.
Can I interject?
Who wants to go first?
Specific
It's my question.
It's her question.
It's my question. I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think it's, you know, this whole demonisation of xenophobia of Muslims. If you actually have somebody in a keffiyeh and she's on the front of Vogue, it's making it fashionable and acceptable. Because I mean, I'm ambivalent about it. I think that they're great. I mean, I think young women, bloody handy to have something like that you can disappear behind, because then you don't get bugged so much. And, you know, and that's just never going away. That's just biological programming. So it's like a, you know, it's a suit of armour. So I don't think that that's a bad thing.
Okay, Miss Rob.
My answer is simply the picture of Katharine wearing her t-shirt which said 58% don't want purging, shaking Thatcher's hand. I must have seen when I was around 13 or 14. And it's one of the things that probably inspired my work in its entirety most, actually. So I think it's had it has the ability to inspire a generation.
We didn't sell them, we only made one. And in actual fact, it was before even Snappy Snap, so it was this hideous monstrosity in the flesh. It was a huge piece of fish. It was like stiff as a board, you know, sticking out like that.
And it was like a huge placard, and the picture is just...
You know, we didn't sell them. And if we do sell them, we raise money for causes with them. So...
Okay, I've got a few more questions. I've got one there, and then what lady at the back in the...
I was a bit surprised that we've got 3 artists who seem to have done, as their political work, mostly work with words. And I was thinking about when the Poles were wanting to combat censorship in their country in the sort of 70s, 60s, 70s and 80s, they would have theatre posters where the images themselves were politically, were bypassing the censorship laws by using images that would actually communicate ideas to people without words, and that couldn't be censored because you couldn't pin down, as a censor, what they were actually saying. And I feel that particularly with this, you know, sort of the move towards trying to criminalise political work, whether actually, I'm surprised that the artists that got here haven't actually done more to use images which are subversive without being able to pin down, a sense of being able to pin down anything on them.
Okay, we'll take a couple more and then the artists can come back. One there, lady in the coat that's like a keffiyeh.
My son, he's 15 and he's trying to work with the police in South London on the ground level on a sort of anti-war campaign. So I just wanted some advice, because they have a t-shirt idea and it's not got very far, but because they've used the word love, they've said love is our only weapon, which was to try to give up these gangs across the estates, to have an amnesty day to put in guns and knives into the police station. But because they've used the word love is our only weapon, somewhere it's blocked by the police and the schools and some of the gangs. So is there any advice from the panel how you can turn that word sort of the other way for kids, you know, who are 15, so these guys, you know, that hang out at the street corners, wear a funky t-shirt in London to promote One Love in London, you know, stop this, these our personal war, you know, with kids hurting.
Thanks for that. There was someone over there. Was there? Maybe not. Someone there.
Just wondering if the panel thought that art should actually be more core, because a lot of people, it strikes me, immediately turn off when they hear words like imperialism. Not everyone wants to have a discussion about the validity of the theory of the London proletariat, but everyone can understand something that basically says in 3 or 4 words, killing is wrong, and which reminds you that with the blood, for example, that is fundamentally what we're talking about. Forget the abstract, we're actually talking about people's bodies being chopped in half. And to me, that's really important, because it just cuts through all of that, and anyone who's not politically aware can get that. And I wonder if perhaps the art shouldn't actually have an even bigger role in what we're doing.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'll take one more and then they can come back. Two maybe. Okay.
On Hiroshima, the firebomb in Japan killed far more people than Hiroshima. And if you see the documentary with McNamara, at the head of the table, he makes it plain that there was no nuclear war just by accident. He said you just locked out. That's a very interesting documentary to see.
It's a really frightening interview, that, isn't it?
Hang on. Just hit the side again. Sorry.
Mine's about Aldermaston, and we're doing that in a big talk.
Speak to Kate about Aldermaston. We'll come back to Aldermaston.
Oh, okay.
Let's come back to the panel. You've heard some of the questions.
Well, I think, you know, obviously art should be, you know, images are great, words get through, okay, in one language, you know, they get through. But just because they're trying to make them illegal, does that mean that we have to capitulate? It's all about freedom of speech. I think we need more words. You know what I mean? Arrest us, you know, repeal the law. It's rubbish. It's an encroachment of our liberties. Yes.
It's also a question of clarity. I mean, I want people to be very clear in my positions. I don't really want to make a picture that can be read as pacifist and could be read otherwise.
I mean, illegality hosting in the early 80s, troops out Northern Ireland.
But you're going for fly posting
fly
rather
posting.
than actually what was written.
Well, Prevention of Terrorism Act, I was doing something that was dodgy, apparently, and the maximum fine was only 15 quid, and I got 4 days in jail. They didn't have the specific clause then, you know, I couldn't make phone calls, nothing. So if they want to shut you down with the Prevention of Terrorism Act, they'll do it anyway, you know, and now it's getting a little bit more subtle. So the way they shut you down is not really legal anyway, you know. I don't think you should worry about it, keep making t-shirts.
No, I'm not. I was actually
David,
being arrested.
did you want to say Hang on, Dave, let's listen.
I don't really like to say that the things that throughout my life have interested me primarily have been images. But I think that I'm interested, images they can suggest an emotion or even encourage an emotion, but they are also capable of misinterpretation. I think that the intellectual content, to use a highfalutin word for it, is important in a protest march also, and I don't see how you can do that without a few letters.
Okay, and just, you know, I mean, there are many artists we work with who work just with images. I mean, this is, I don't know if people can see it, this is an image from Richard Hamilton, the late Richard Hamilton, which is Blair as a gunslinger. I think that's a very, very, very powerful image. And Peter Kennard, the photomontage artist, really working in the tradition of people like John Hartfield, who worked in the 30s against the Nazis. I mean, this is Peter's work, which doesn't include words, but they're still fantastically powerful images. I think that's nearly it. I want to thank everybody for for coming. I want to thank the artists particularly, and I want to hear what David's got his kick-up to say.
I would just like to read something that I forgot to at the end of my piece.
Good.
It's a Chomsky quote. He wrote, "If you go to one demonstration and then go home, that's something. But the people in power can live with that. What they can't live with is sustained pressure that keeps building, organisations that keep doing things, people that keep learning lessons from the last time and doing it better the next time."
What a fantastic way to finish. Thank you.